Good morning. My name is Melvin Perez and I'll be presenting on the Consumer Price Index for January 2021. The outline of my presentation is as follows. First, we will look at the Consumer Price Index for January 2021. Secondly, we will look at the inflation rate by major categories. Thirdly, we will look at the inflation rate by municipality. Fourthly, we will look at the regional inflation rate. Lastly, we will have a look at the inflation rate for the year 2020 in comparison to the year 2019. Before we get into the inflation rate for January 2021, let's first look at what is the Consumer Price Index and inflation rate. The Consumer Price Index, also called the CPI, is a statistics used to indicate how prices that consumers pay for a specific basket of goods and services change over time, relative to a base period. In this case, our current base period for the Consumer Price Index is October 2020, which means that the CPI for any given month is a measure of prices in that month relative to prices in the base period. The Consumer Price Index is then used to calculate the inflation rate. Hence, the inflation rate is the percentage change in the Consumer Price Index over a specific period. For this presentation, the specific period will be comparing January of 2021 to January of 2020. For example, if the overall Consumer Price Index in January 2019 was 100, and the Consumer Price Index for January 2020 was 105, then the inflation rate for this period is 5%. With that in mind, the inflation rate for the month of January 2021 stood at 1%. This means that overall, the cost of regular purchased goods and services increased by 1% in comparison to January of 2020. Before we look at the major categories affecting the inflation rate of 1%, let's look at the All-Items Consumer Price Index, which summarizes all categories of goods and services for the past 5 years. With our main emphasis being the month of January, we can see that January 2021 recorded a Consumer Price Index of 101.3, and January of 2020 recorded a Consumer Price Index of 100.2, which is why the increase for the period was 1%. This indicates that the decrease during this period were not enough to offset the increases within the various categories, which we will see throughout the presentation. Looking at the trend line, it is clearly showing us how prices have been increasing since January of 2016 up to January of 2021. Comparing these two periods, an inflation rate of 2.9% will be recorded. This means that prices for goods and services had increased 2.9% in January of 2021 when compared to January 2016. Now, coming back to our interest period, we will have a closer look at what contributed to the inflation rate of 1%. Looking at the major categories affecting the inflation rate, the food and non-alcoholic beverages category increased by 5.7%. This was the primary category exerting upward pressure on the overall inflation rate. The housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuel category increased by 1.6%. The personal care, social protection, and miscellaneous goods and services category rise by 2.2%, while the transport category decreased by 3.1%, and the restaurant and accommodation services category decreased by 12.8%. This resulted in an overall average change of 1% for the All-Item Consumer Price Index. Now that we have identified the major categories affecting the inflation rate, we will break down each category to see what contributed to the increase or decrease within the category. First, let's look at the food and non-alcoholic beverages category, which increased by 5.7% for the month of January 2021 when compared to January of 2020. The food subcategory alone, with an increase of 6.5%, was exclusively responsible for the increase within the category, as higher prices across major food groups were observed. In particular, fresh vegetables and fruits were the main items that contributed to the increase. Higher prices were observed in products such as tomatoes, rice, cabbage, watermelon, potatoes, onion, and sweet pepper. These increases combined were sufficient to offset lower prices among other goods within this category, such as ground beef, pork chops, beef steak, and plantain. Now let's look at the food and non-alcoholic beverages category consumer price index for the past 5 years. It is important to know that this category has the highest weight of all the other categories, so any movement within this category is more than likely that will affect the all-item movement. From as far back as January 2016 to March 2020, we can observe how the category prices has been fluctuating throughout the years, with prices increasing and decreasing in the different periods. From March 2020 up to January 2021, which correspond to the onset of COVID-19 in Belize, we can observe how prices within the category had a tremendous increase during this month. Most of these increases are accounted to the changes in some fruits, vegetables, and meat prices. Now let's look at how the category index have influenced the all-item during these 5 years. It is clearly seen in November 2017, where the category prices had an increase, which influenced the all-item index to have an increase as well. We can also see it in November on to January 2021, where the overall consumer price index was influenced by the food and non-alcoholic beverages category. Secondly, let's look at the housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuel category, which saw an increase of 1.6%. This was largely the result of a 1.6% increase in home rental costs for the month, as higher prices were recorded in municipalities of Belize City, San Ignacio, Santa Elena, Punta Gorda Town, and the city of Belmopan. In addition, liquefied petroleum gas prices saw a small increase of 7.4%, as the average cost of a 100-pound cylinder of liquefied petroleum gas went from $98.75 in January 2020 to $106.01 in January 2021. Now let's look at the housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuel category index for the past 5 years. As we can see, this is one of the index that influence heavily the all-item consumer price index. A significant change in this category tends to influence the overall result of the all-item consumer price index, given that it has the second highest weight in the consumer price index. As we can observe from January to February of 2016, prices within the category decreased, which influenced the all-item index to decrease. Also, in November 2020, we can see that there was a huge spike in the category, which influenced the all-item to have an increase during that period as well. So we can see that there are some instances that the all-item is influenced by the category. Thirdly, let's look at the personal care, social protection, and miscellaneous goods and services category, which went up by 2.2%. This increase was mainly due to a sharp 2.7% rise in the personal care subcategory, as higher prices were observed for personal hygiene products for the first month of the year 2021. Also, a 3.5% increase was seen in the subcategory of other services, which accounts for services for funeral preparations. Fourthly, let's look at the transport category, which recorded a 3.1% decrease for the month of January 2021. This was mainly due to a significant decrease in the fuel and lubricant subcategory, as lower prices for motor oils and among the various fuel types, premium saw a significant decrease, which we will see later on. These decreases were, however, partially offset by a 9.5% and a 3.3% rise in international airfare and taxi fare, respectively. Now, let's look at the details for fuel prices. At the pump, the price per gallon for premium gasoline decreased by 14.5%, from $10.85 in January 2020 to $9.28 in January 2021. Regular gasoline went down by 7.1%, from $10.60 in January 2020 to $9.36 in January 2021, while diesel dropped by 11.8% from $10.01 in January 2020 to $8.83 in January 2021. Looking at the average fuel prices at a bigger picture for the past 5 years, we can see how fuel prices strongly fluctuate throughout the years. Since January of 2016 to January 2021, diesel prices have increased by $2.31. Premium prices have increased by 71 cents, and regular prices have increased by $1.25. We can also observe in the graph that in April to May of last year, all fuel prices had a deep drop, and since then, fuel prices, specifically diesel and regular, had been increasing up to January of 2021. Now let's look at how prices in the transport category have influenced the All-Item Index for the past 5 years. It can clearly be seen that the spike in February 2017 due to a significant increase in airfare prices influenced the All-Item to have a small spike in that period. It can also be seen in November 2017, where international airfare combined with fuel prices had an increase, and that was enough to influence the All-Item Index to have an increase as well. So we can see that there are some instances that the All-Item Index is influenced by the Transport Index. Lastly, let's look at the Restaurant and Accommodation Services category, which had a decrease of 12.8%. This was mainly due to a significant drop of 24.4% in accommodation services, as lower prices for hotel accommodation were recorded. Also, a 0.4% decline was seen in the food and beverages service subcategory, as lower prices for restaurant services was observed in January 2021 when compared to January 2020. Looking at the inflation rate at the municipality level, it can clearly be seen that Punta Gorda town experienced the highest monthly increase in consumer prices, with an inflation rate of 2.3%, as consumers in this town saw above average increase in prices for food, pharmaceutical products, liquefied petroleum gas prices, and home rental costs. On the other hand, in the north, Corozal town experienced the lowest inflation rate, with prices going down by 0.2% when compared to January of 2020, as consumers in this town saw greater than average reduction in clothing, footwear for women, and hotel accommodation. Now that we have seen the inflation rate at the municipality level, let's look at the inflation rate at the regional level. This will tell us if prices are increasing or decreasing within our close neighbors. First, let's look at the Dominican Republic, who had an inflation rate of 6.2%, followed by Guatemala with a 5.2%. Jumping way to El Salvador, we can see that it was the country with the lowest inflation rate in the region, with a 0.3% for the month of January 2021 when compared to January 2020. Now let's look at the annual inflation rate for the year 2020 when compared to the year 2019. The inflation rate for the year 2020 stood at 0.1%. Across the various categories, the most significant change was seen in the food and non-alcoholic beverages category, which rose by 1.1%. Within this category, higher prices for fresh vegetables such as cabbage, lettuce, tomatoes, and onion were recorded. In addition, the housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuel category saw a small increase of 0.6% for the year 2020. This was due to a rise of 1.1% in home rental costs, which was partially offset by a fall in liquefied petroleum gas prices for the year when compared to 2019. These increases, however, were somehow balanced by decreases in categories of transport, as lower prices for all types of fuel were recorded, and restaurant and accommodation services, as lower prices for hotel accommodation was recorded for the year 2020 when compared to the year 2019. As a summary, the inflation rate for January 2021 stood at 1%. This was mainly due to an increase in the categories of food and non-alcoholic beverages, housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuel, and personal care, social protection, and miscellaneous goods and services. Thank you.